Yes, it is my privilege tonight to get to introduce you to Jennifer and Mike Kainz, the owners, and I think there's additional owners as well of the Wild Onion Brewery. But family business, you bet. And I'm not going to share with you anything about what Mike shared or Jennifer, whichever one sent me the email. I'm not going to share anything about what they're going to talk about tonight, all their sustainability practices, because of course that's the topic, because I know Mike's going to do that much better and I don't want to steal his thunder. But I just mentioned to Mike, I said he has one of the most interesting backgrounds of anyone I've heard of. So I do want to share with you just a little bit about Mike as our speaker. Mike is the founding brewmaster and one of the co-owners, as I said, of Wild Onion Brewery in Lake Barrington. He graduated from Denison University in 1987, double majoring in French and economics. And I found myself thinking, prepared him to become a brewmaster. Anyway, he spent his this will help you understand here. He spent his junior year in college studying in Paris, where he learned to appreciate all the amazing styles and flavors of beer. Get the connection? that have been brewed in Europe for centuries. So upon returning to the States in '86, Mike began home brewing out of necessity to recreate those full-bodied styles that he had learned to like so much in Europe. He then joined the Peace Corps right after college and ended up working as an agriculture volunteer in Morocco. So he was given the task of converting a 2.5-acre lot to a functioning small-scale farm on the grounds of an orphanage in southern Morocco. So that then is what led to his lifelong passion for sustainable gardening and composting. And I think that's going to come up tonight too. So Mike and his family founded Wild Onion Brewery in '96, and then it was located in a different location, but they opened the current site for their pub and brewery and banquet hall in 2000, and they founded it in 2000 and then opened the current doors in 2003. So from this point on, I'm going to hand this to Mike and let him tell you all about what they do to run a very sustainable business there. So glad to have you guys here, and let's give a thank you to Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate that. Thank you for the invite to speak here tonight, and just tell me to be quiet, because once I get going, sometimes it's hard to stop. So a little history about our company, our brewery, the name Wild Onion. We wanted to honor the original inhabitants of this region, the Potawatomi Indians. Is that better? Potawatomi Indians were the native inhabitants here throughout all of northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin. And so the word, maybe some of you know this, but the word Chicago comes from the Potawatomi phrase Chicagua. Chicagua. We actually learned that's the proper pronunciation. The first year of business we were open, a gentleman called, and he had a PhD in pre-1850s history of Chicago. And he said, you know, you're mispronouncing it. It's not Chicago, it's Chicagua. And it basically means land of the stinking onions. So translated directly, there were wild onions that grew everywhere along in the wetlands, along the banks of the Chicago River. And so the original fur traders that came down through the waterways from Canada into Illinois came upon the Chicago River flowing into Lake Michigan at that point, since reversed the other way, obviously. But and then they kept hearing the Chicagua, because the wild onions were growing everywhere. So that's a story that I grew up with, and so we wanted to name our brewery in honor of the original inhabitants of this region. So, and we don't brew beer with onions. We've had that question way too many times over all the years. So. Although with the way beer's going these days, who knows, right? We've had some interesting ideas about that, but I never put onions in beer to date. So, so that's history of our company. We started brewing beer in '97, and it was original brew house was cobbled together out of old used dairy tanks that we got from the fields of northern Wisconsin. So this was back when it was hard to find. There weren't as many fabricators out there, and we were starting like a lot of small companies on a shoestring budget. So we found these old open fermenters. They were old previous dairy holding tanks, and they were literally in the field of northern Wisconsin. We're up there in the wintertime, 2 feet of snow. Okay, I think it's a tank. It's going to work. And we had that converted, and that was our first brewery. Opened, like I said, '97. Patty Pale Ale was our first beer. It was a delicious a hop forward pale ale. So this was really the beginning of the craft beer revolution. So we're proud to say we've been part of this for a long time. So good fortune came upon us, and in the year 2000, we purchased a property down the street from our original brewery, and it was a very interesting site. It was an old gravel quarry that had been quarried out in the 1950s for what is called bank runs. So it's a sand and gravel, and that's what they use for road base building. So in that time period, 1950s, Route 14 was being widened, and so they quarried out this good sized quarry for the bank run, for the sand and gravel. It became, after that, it became a fishing, paper fishing place. And then it fell into disrepair after a kind of an ill-conceived idea. This guy put a scuba diving site there, and he basically sunk. He basically completely scarred and ruined the site. He put AstroTurf on the banks, thinking that it would keep the weeds at bay, which it didn't. He put a liner on the bottom of the lake and held it down with concrete and tires. And then he thought people would come and pay to scuba dive. He put some structure in the lake. There's a Sikorsky helicopter at the bottom of the lake. There's a 707 fuselage. A lot of different strange structure. And so we knew about all this, but this gentleman was a tenant, and he left with a lot of school district's money after a rough season. So now the site was in disrepair, and we purchased it in 2000 with the thought of eventually opening up a pub, a tasting room, and an extension of our brewery. And so from that point forward, from 2000 until we opened the doors in 2003, we were really not just cleaning up the site, but restoring it back to truly native vegetation. So that was really an exciting time period for us, because we weren't yet in the restaurant business, which is a challenging business, as any of you might know. So, but we had this window of opportunity before we opened the doors, before we were even building our restaurant, to clean the quarry up. And so we literally had the entire banks scraped clean, and that involved ripping all the weeds out, the AstroTurf, taking all those concrete tires out, and it's about a 10-acre lake, so it's long and narrow, but it's a good sized body of water. And in addition to that, the back of the property, there were about 30 power boats, old power boats that had been trashed there. So it literally was a garbage dump. And so the first 2 years were spent cleaning it up, and so we're kind of getting it back to a blank slate. And that's when the fun began. And with a good friend of mine who was a local science teacher, who was very interested in prairie restoration, native plant restoration, we then took this blank slate of this former gravel quarry and we seeded it the first year. So this would have been 2002. And then you can imagine sand and gravel, there's nothing organic, there's no soil. So we had to do a lot of work, and it's steep. It's an old quarry, so the banks are fairly steep. So we seeded it after putting compost we brought in, seeded it, and put this fabric called geojute, which is a biodegradable material that's great for soil erosion control. And so we were able to keep the soil on the banks long enough for those little seedlings to start. And it's just amazing. I mean, we were just walking down the road along the lake just the other day, and it's a gorgeous time of the year for native plants, by the way. The colors, it's incredible. And to see these plants now that came from seed, in 2002, to see where they're at. One of my favorites is called compass plant. I'm not sure if anyone knows that particular plant. It gets just massive, and the direction of the leaves are what the pioneers used to navigate east to west, because that's the way the leaves actually point. So it's a fascinating plant. It gets very big. The tap roots go down anywhere from 10 to 15 feet. And I can confirm that, because in one of our multiple add-ons, we had to dig into a portion of the hill that we'd planted these plants. And so it was like a cross section going all the way down of a compass plant's root system. And it was 15 feet deep. It was truly amazing. So other than the first year of when we first planted, where we did have to irrigate, so we pumped out from the lake to water those little native seedlings. They're very tender that first year, but by year 2, they'd already gotten established, and now it's just it looks like a wilderness. And just to see the various insects that arrived, throughout the season, from early to midsummer to now, and then the lake itself with all that native vegetation, we've got a lot more migratory birds that come through. So it's really neat to see. In early spring, we'll get mergansers, cormorants. All kinds of, so it's just to see the site that was just a neutral blank slate go from that to something that's just got all kinds of biodiversity. It's been really a treat, and it's been fun to watch our customers over the years come back at certain times of the year. We've got a patio that looks out over the lake, to just witness the changing of the colors from spring to summer to fall. So it's been a really exciting process. So that was stage 1, was restoring the quarry banks. Stage 2 was, once we finished actually building our restaurant, was to plant natives throughout the entire, basically the entire land adjacent and part of the parking lot. So we put a lot of islands in. And we've got berms that we built up. And so we now use plugs. Instead of seeding, we brought plugs in from a company called Agricol up in Janesville, I believe, Wisconsin. So, you know, flats upon flats of established native plants, which gave them more of a leg up, especially in that environment where you've got an island, it's, you know, it's in a parking lot. So we didn't put irrigation in there. And so it really was paramount that first year to take good care of having the plugs made all the difference. And so again, now those same islands are teeming with life to the point that we have to cut it all back as it gets in onto the asphalt. And we've had, you know, the funny is I watch somebody walk out the front door of the restaurant and they'll go, well, you know, somebody doesn't know. They'll go, well, look at all these weeds, and just kills me because in one little island, you can have, you know, 15 to 20 different species of plants. So, and, you know, just some of the plants that we did plant, just got on list: little and big blue stem, purple aster, coreopsis, black-eyed Susans, purple coneflower, which is, you know, everywhere here, compass plant, and wild onions, of course. And, you know, which are related to garlic and ramps. So I'm not sure if there's any foragers here, if you're lucky enough in the spring to find a ramp out on the forest floor, and you get that little leaf and you taste it, and it tastes exactly like onions. So they're all in that same family. So some of the native trees we planted, catalpa, very easy to grow, highly recommend that. Kentucky coffee tree, white oak, swamp oak, bur oaks, and now the bur oaks that we planted, 20 some odd years ago now are big and healthy, and they were actually the acorns dropping to see the new oaks. So again, it's so fun to see, you know, a long-term vision kind of come to fruition, and it's just been an exciting process. So some of the challenges of doing this for us on a quarry, being that it was, the nature of scarring the earth like that is going down deep and the banks are steep. So you've got, it's hard to keep that soil and that erosion at bay. So it's a retention basin. So it basically takes all of the stormwater, and we're in industrial parks, there's a lot of concrete, a lot of impervious surface there. So the bounce of the water level is dramatic. And and now we're in a wet period. For the past 5+ years we have been, but the early years that we opened our restaurant, we were in the opposite. It was a very dry period. So the lake level dropped and it dropped and it dropped. So where we had planted originally was way high, now exposed to lots of, you know, previously underwater area. And so that was the dead zone, right? So nothing could grow there. And then when the water level came back up, so we walked this fine line of overplanting or underplanting. And so that was in a dry period. So 03 to 2010, 2011. And then it started raining a lot more. And that retention basin will pick up 2 feet of water overnight if we've had a heavy rain. And so the opposite occurred. A lot of our native plants became submerged. And by 2018, the water level got so high that it was actually flowing in through the drain to our brewery, which is not a good thing, right? So we actually had to then cut in an overspill, if you will, a spillway, but a very low-tech one that allowed the water level to get back down to a level that we could manage. So that's been a challenge I wanted to mention in that type of environment, you know, in converting a quarry to that. So been a lot of challenges along the way. So as I segue into the next part of my talk here, which is about geothermal energy, because we have a geothermal loop in that lake. And so the first year our restaurant was open, that's how the part of the building is heated and cooled. First year we were open, it was summer, it was hot, the lake level kept dropping, and our loop that provides air conditioning for the building was suddenly out of water. So now it's the end of August, and we've got 85-degree dining room, and we've got customers that are sweating like, oh man, this is the price I pay for being, you know, a little forward thinking. So again, it was that fluctuating lake level that was really tough early on, and we ended up having to move that loop into much deeper water, and I was lucky to have deeper water. So so those are some of the challenges with the lake, but I would encourage anyone, if you haven't been to our site, please come visit. The patio's closed, unfortunately, because of labor issues. Hard to find staff, but you're welcome to walk the site to see the plants right now in just all their glory right now. Ongoing maintenance. So we do a spring burn if the conditions allow, and that's always tricky. If anyone's done any prairie burns, it's that window in March, right before the plants are starting. If the wind is right or not right, and you want it where the vegetation, the dead vegetation is exposed, But most years we get off, we'll be able to do that, and it works just fine. We have to get a permit through the IEPA and then through the local fire department. So it's a little more tricky. I learned the hard way. You can't just start a fire. We're across the street from the fire department. So we have a good working relationship, but they have showed up a few times when we decided to do a burn. But those years that we've done the burns, it's amazing. By the time you get into mid to late April, the plants that, the weeds that you've killed, the weed seeds that you've killed, and the good plants come right back up. It's so pretty amazing. So that's how we maintain it annually. And we've also got a really great working collaboration with a wonderful organization called CFC, Citizens for Conservation. Now, they've been around for 50 years. Great local organization. They've been involved in purchasing and preserving upwards of 750 acres. And they just acquired another 200 plus acres. So they're an amazing group, and we've worked with them. We actually donated 4 acres of behind our property. It was just straight wetland to them. And so that's an ongoing restoration. Wetland restoration is very, very difficult. It's been taken over by reed canary grass. Not sure yet. It's very invasive, tall grass. The roots choke out everything. So they've got a long-term vision. And, the 50 years they've been doing this, I think it's going to take another 50 to truly bring the wetlands back to where we want them to be. But a great gentleman by the name of Tom Vanderpool, who since passed, but he was really the brainchild of CFC, and his knowledge of native plants and his ability to take a quadrant, like he would take a 10-foot by 10-foot section and restore it from these, nothingness to a true mecca for butterflies, and unbelievable. And some of these native plants that are very rare, he would actually walk the railways. Apparently that's where a lot of the native seeds are found. And I didn't know that, but so they have a seed bank of some really rare native plants. So pretty fascinating. So we're happy to be working with them. We do work days with them occasionally, clearing out some of the brush behind the property. So a great organization. They've been a big part of helping us and inspiration to us as well. So moving on to our building. As a brewer, I knew how energy intensive the process of brewing beer is. It truly is. We use a lot of energy, electricity, water. To give you an example, per 1 gallon of beer brewed, there's 5 gallons of water required. And so one of the best cutting edge breweries is New Belgium out of Colorado. They've brought their water usage down to about 1 gallon to about 2.5 gallons of actual water. So that's an amazing ratio, almost unheard of. But so I knew that we use a lot of energy and a lot of water. So it was my goal when we built our place to make the building as energy efficient as possible. And so we started with a product called Solar Creep. So essentially we have a very well insulated concrete shell. And what you get with that, this product, they involve spraying concrete on both the exterior and the interior. And so you end up with a wall that's about 14 inches thick with 8 inches of insulation in the middle and a lot of thermal mass on both the inside and the outside. So it's a skin, it's a shell, if you will, but it retains the heat in the wintertime, and in the summertime, it keeps the heat out. So, we wanted to build a building that could survive the cold winters here, but also the hot summers. And so they started with that. And then I mentioned the geothermal energy. So geothermal, does anybody know much about geothermal in this room? Okay. So, and you're going to hear a lot more with I wish they would have called it something other than the Inflation Reduction Act, because really it's a misnomer, but it's the climate bill. And I'm sure everyone in this room is excited to see that bill pass. In that bill is a lot of funding for transitioning over to geothermal energy. So geothermal is essentially, it's a refrigeration compressor, if you will, that can be reversed. It can create heat and it can create cool. And what you're doing with geothermal is you're taking the latent temperature of the earth and the air and using that to, in the wintertime, to put the heat into buildings, and in the summertime to take the heat out of the buildings. And so in our case, with a large, deep lake like we had, I'd done a lot of research. You can do a lake loop or a land loop. So if you had, let's say, 5 acres of property, you could put a loop in your backyard, because below 4 feet, it's a consistent 55 degrees all year round, no matter how cold it gets in the wintertime. So, and if you've got a big enough lake or pond in your backyard, same concept. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking heat from our building in the summertime and displacing it into the lake. And this is where it gets fun. The wintertime, it's the opposite. We're taking heat from the water and putting it back into the building. And that's the incredible aspect of geothermal, is that it uses a fraction of electricity, but it's taking latent temperature. And so the delta T, the change in temperature, is not that huge. So all right, and people say, well, how can you get heat out of a frozen lake in the middle of the winter? So if it's, say, the air temp is 10 degrees, well, your water temp is no cooler than 32 degrees. So now we're already 22 degrees warmer. So we're taking that temperature and we're boosting it with a heat pump, which is a compressor that is essentially taking the latent heat in the water, boosting it up to a warm enough level that it can then be blown through our ducts, through our air handlers. And so it's going to become, this is the true green revolution is going to be, thank goodness the government is behind this, but as homeowners starting in January 1st, I believe, depending on your income level, you'll be able to get up to $14,000 paid for the installation of a new geothermal system. So it's going to be a game changer for reducing electric bills and for creating a more steady level of comfort. So, so we put that system in, as I mentioned, the first year we opened. The water level dropped, so we had to move that loop down in deeper water. That worked fine. But one of the challenges was that back when we were having the system engineered in 2001, the technology wasn't nearly as far as it is now. And so I hired an engineer and he did all the specs and everything. Turns out the system was undersized for one reason. Human beings give off heat. And I learned this. Each one of us gives up 3 BTUs an hour. So if you've got your house and there's only 3 of you in your living room, it's not gonna be a big deal. But you've got a restaurant with 150 patrons on a hot day giving off heat. And so our system was not properly sized for the amount of human beings inside the building. So that was a learning curve and a painful one too. So we had to add additional traditional air conditioning on top of the existing geothermal system. Flip side, in the wintertime, because it was improperly engineered, we had to add additional electric coils into our ductwork to boost it to get it warm enough. So there was a learning curve, to say the very least. And I know the technology has come way, way far from that point, to the point that now air-to-air heat exchangers and heat pumps are used. And in these cold winters, you can still generate enough heat from just the cold air outside to heat your home. So I encourage you to all look into it after the first year when those rebates become available. If you've got a good HVAC company that can learn and quickly, it's really the future. So, but it works for us on some levels. But again, we've still had to supplement that with more traditional methods of heating and cooling. So, but still, I think it is the future. So. I mentioned the building, the shell. We also built using insulspan panels. So those are 4 inches thick and they keep the heat in as well. So it's really a well-insulated building. The inside of the building is a timber frame, and we built the frame. I say we built it. We had a company that was really good at doing this come out and do it. But it's made from deadfall timber. So it's Doug fir that came from the Pacific Northwest. This was deadfall timber that had fallen on the forest floors 100 years previous. So no trees were, actually felled in the process. And the really neat thing is that these were trees that could have been 250 years old when they fell to the ground, these big ferocious storms they get out there in the wintertime. So we like to say that our sitting there having a pint of beer, you're looking up at timbers that are older than the American Revolution. And so there's a sense of history there that we're very proud of. And the joinery is really beautiful, and just the wood, the warm orange wood. So that was part of our green building. And it really is, I love to see people just sitting there looking up and never having seen these big fat timbers before. So moving on to our brewery. Again, the labor intensive it is that too, but energy intensive, this brewing beer required us to take a look at anything we could to reduce our energy footprint. And I'm proud to say that, the word carbon footprint wasn't being thrown around much back in 2000, 2001. So it's now, everyone knows what that means. So our goal was to reduce our footprint as best we could, given that we're in a energy intensive business, both the brewing and the restaurant side. So on the brewery side, we bought a used system that was engineered and built in Austria, and the energy costs in Europe have been high forever. And you look at what they're going through right now with the war in Ukraine, the cost of natural gas, we're seeing it here, and we're getting off easy compared to the Europeans, especially going into winter. But the engineers over there for a long time have had to come up with very efficient ways to heat and cool, because with beer, you got 2 things going on. You're boiling, you got a lot of heat on the early side of brewing the beer, and then after that, it's all cooling, all refrigeration. So the system we bought actually came with a glycol system. Glycol is like the antifreeze. That's what is used in our tanks to keep the beer cold, that had hundreds and hundreds of little plastic balls full of water. Looked like a McDonald's Playland, but inside the tank, you can't see it. And what happens is when we're not using a lot of energy There's not a big demand on the refrigeration side. Those balls freeze. And so basically glycol is about 28 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the balls have water, freezes at 32. So now you're creating a latent source of on-demand refrigeration when you need it. So this was, I thought, fascinating. These engineers, again, Austrian, they figured out, this is a way you're going to be able to spend less on electricity and then have that energy there when you need it. Because when you're brewing and you're transferring the beer from the kettle into your fermenter, you're crash cooling it. So you use a lot of refrigeration. So there's a peak demand. And so it helps stabilize that. They also came up with a brew kettle that the typical boil for beer is 90 minutes, an hour and a half. And they wanted to reduce that boil time by 20 minutes to shave off 20 minutes of natural gas use. So they created a high-powered, basically an exhaust fan that created a vacuum. So the brew kettle would be the lid, when you lift it up, it would get to like really pry it up. It would create enough suction that it would evaporate 20 minutes faster than a typical brew kettle. Like right now, our bigger kettle goes right up through the atmosphere. But this was really a cutting edge system. And I, we're thankful at that point in time, there was a lot of used brew equipment for sale because a lot of little breweries had gone under. So we got this system for a song, and yet we still have all this equipment that's, it's paid for itself tenfold. So, but really, I applaud those engineers in Europe for doing what they have been doing for a long time because of the cost of energy over there. All right, moving on to our site. So one of the effluents, the byproduct of brewing is spent grain. I'm not sure if any of you have ever had any opportunity to get your hands on it or to smell it, but it's barley, malted barley, and we extract, when we're brewing, we are basically converting the starches to sugars, and we extract that sweet water called wort, and that's what the yeast consumes to make beer. But what's left over is the malted barley, still in its form, its mass. And to put it in perspective, on a big brew in our big system, 3,600 pounds dry malted barley goes in, about 10,000 pounds wet comes out. That's one brew day. So 2 brew days will generate 20,000 pounds of spent grain. So a long time ago, had to figure out what we're going to do with this. And we were fortunate to have enough acreage behind it. I began composting it. And, careful what you wish for in life, because, I'm not, how about a show of hands? Who composts here in this room? I figured. So I know I'm preaching to the choir. It's awesome. And you all know it's as much of an art as it is a science. And you take it on a larger scale with spent grain, it's no different, but requires a bucket. I've got a small John Deere tractor. It involves aeration. If you don't get to it right in time, it has a very unique aroma. And that I'm being nice when I say that. So, but it's been really great to watch what happens to that spent grain. It composted properly in about 3 to 4 months. So I'll mix in wood chips with it to give it the proper carbon to nitrogen ratio, the 3-to-1, 3 parts carbon, 1 part nitrogen. That's what you need for optimum composting. So we get little wood chips in there and the wonderful sludgy spent grain, and it starts cooking. And so I would say we compost about 80% of our spent grain in the winter months when it's hard to get back to the back of the property. I take it to a place called Midwest Organics, which is a fantastic, amazing, one of the largest, I think, composting facilities in the Midwest. And it really just for a field trip to go see what they do, the large windrows and the machines that turn it. So they will, I have to pay to dump it there, which kind of, goes against the grain, no pun intended, but it's definitely a nice option to have that you've got that larger scale composting facility, because there are breweries, unfortunately, in the city, all the new breweries have popped up. Some are putting spent grain into dumpsters and it's getting hauled to landfills. And if it's not properly composted, it creates methane, right? And we all know that methane is a far more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So it's my happiest days are when I go back there and you can see the piles steaming, and you go to bucket in there, and it just, so we, a year ago, we actually, you're gonna laugh at this, we cooked, we made a hard-boiled egg in the compost pile. Oh, it worked, okay, and I ate it. So basically, it cooked for a day, and it done properly. Compost should be about 160 in its peak, 160, 165. So it is exothermic. It's creating a lot of energy, and that egg cooked and pulled it out, and it was protected with a shell. So it had a unique essence to it. I won't lie, but it was okay. So and I went to composting school and learned that they had, at Midwest Organics, actually, they cook Thanksgiving turkey in their compost pile. And there were multiple bags and all kinds of stuff there, but they leave it there, and it gets hot enough and long enough, if they're composting properly, that they can actually do that. So yeah.
Can't you bake with spent grain also?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. But when it's fresh, because it turns so quickly, yeah. But you can make great breads with it. We've dabbled in it. You can make real rustic, like Russian peasant breads, kind of like. And I'm not a baker, but I'm sure you could do all kinds of things. You've got the husk is still there, so it lends itself to it. Depending on the beer style, the darker style, stouts, brown ales, you get more of a nuttiness that comes through. So yeah, if you can you're welcome to come get a bucket at our place. Yeah, right. So the composting is an ongoing, basically done out of necessity, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. That really was what drove that. A lot of breweries in the old days were near animal farms. So whether it was cattle or pigs, we don't have that option in the Barrington area. So if there were a pig farmer that was nearby, he'd be more than happy to come get it. So again, it was done out of necessity. We also, at the pub and the restaurant, it's been an ongoing challenge. We compost our pre-consumer food waste. And we've learned that that's really the only food that we can compost, because we've tried the post-consumer food waste, which would be scraps from plates. There's so much, whether it's napkins or silverware or meat or grease, it doesn't, you can't control it. And then the raccoons, and we've got a lot of local raccoons that love our dumpsters anyway. But so we take the trimmings. So we have a banquet facility. So we have a lot of, it's carrot tops, celery tops, anything that is going to go back into the earth. So we do compost that as well. So, and as best we can. And so we've got a great waste hauler by us called Prairie Land. And they do offer that, that service as well. They will take your composting scraps close to Midwest Organics, getting back up more condos. So, all right, so we formed a non-for-profit called Mindful Waste, and my wife Jennifer is the brainchild behind this. So she went back to school and got her master's degree in conservation biology with a focus on basically food waste in the school system. And it's been a fascinating journey to watch what she's learned, what we've learned over the years. So she got really very embedded in District 220, the Barrington School District, and has done waste audits in all of the schools throughout the district. And the amount of food waste is truly staggering. You can imagine, there's a lot of reasons behind it, but these kids don't have a lot of time to eat lunch. And so, you watch, if it's the free and reduced lunch or the government mandated the nutritional things, a lot of this food is unedible, unfortunately. It's, green apples these kids don't want. For a lot of reasons, it goes right back in. So you'll see a kid, eat a little bit and it goes right back into a garbage can. So she was able to spearhead, teaching these kids about food waste and separating food waste and then the recycling. So and it's been a fascinating journey for me, because it's the littlest kids they get it the best and the most, right? Those little brains, they come alive. She just finished doing a field trip, and I'll talk about the worms in a second. But she's embedded in our district's third grade curriculum. And so our goal is to expand that, because along with composting, we've begun vermicompost or vermiculture, which are worms, red wigglers. So nature's composter. And anybody who does compost knows that when you've had your main peak, I call it ferment compost, goes down and it begins to cool down, the worms come up from underneath, and they're the little red guys. They're not the big juicy earthworms, the red wigglers. And they finish off that compost and break it down to the most amazing soil. And what they excrete is the most amazing fertilizer on the planet. So worm castings, you can buy them in bags at Home Depot. So we've got a small scale vermicomposting and vermiculture Quonset hut in the back of our property. So we take the finished compost and then let the worms do what they do best, and then harvest those castings. And one of my very happy moments to see Jennifer right after COVID hit, we were shut down for 2.5 months. So we had a lot of castings, and she sat out in our parking lot on 2 Saturdays in a row and sold $1,200 worth of worm poop in our parking lot. So I couldn't be prouder of her for that, right? So very cool. Yeah. And so one of our goals is to eventually bring the kids to our site. Right now, she takes the worms to the schools. And for the past 2 years with COVID and all, she's had the traveling worm show, and they take the big, totes and the worms. But to watch these kids, these third graders, getting their hands dirty and just the pure joy in their faces when it's this basic thing, they're just digging in this wonderful compost, this soil. But they loved it. The one she just finished this past year at Barrington High School, all the kids came there, and they couldn't have been happier. And these were third graders who were true COVID kids, because they had, for the past 2 years, kindergarten and first grade, hadn't really been able to do anything. So it was just really neat to see the level of excitement they had. So that is an ongoing effort of ours to take the compost to the next level. And I would highly recommend anybody, if you are interested, you can do it in a small scale in your garage. You can get a little plastic bin with a false bottom where the castings come through. You can make a tea out of that, the compost tea, a worm casting tea that's great for top dressing your plants, your garden plants. So really a fantastic process. So and it's we've got worms in our basement and worms at our pub. So and they do escape, and occasionally we'll have worms coming up the stairs. And so it's a true labor, a labor of love for sure. How am I doing time wise here? I'm not sure. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. So our future goals, as I mentioned, we bring those field trips of kids to our site for we call it a wormery. In addition to that, we'd like to implement some solar energy to offset our electric needs. Now, with the operation as large and diverse as ours, there's no way that we could have all solar. I got a quote 20 years ago from a company before the price came way down, and to provide 30% of our electric would have cost $1.1 million in a solar array. Now it's come way down, but it's still, to power a commercial plant, you need a lot of solar panels. So we'd like to offset some of it. So that's a goal. Now with all of the rebates and incentives, it's an exciting time to be thinking about that. And small scale on the backside of our property as well. And then we've got an ongoing initiative with CFC, Citizens for Conservation, where they have purchased land that is part of our wetlands. So Flint Creek drains into the Fox River, and that's directly behind our property. So CFC has been acquiring land, so they want to create a greenway walk that would connect basically from Route 14 all the way up to the Fox River, and it goes right through the back end of our property. But that's a long-term project. You've got boardwalks and funding and grant writing and lots, but it's been an ongoing goal that we've all had. So and yeah, so you got to have goals, and if you achieve a third of them, then it's going well. So and I will be quiet now because I could just keep going. So but do we have any questions? We have time. All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Any questions about any aspect of? Yeah.
Well, I would just like to say, you guys are amazing. I had no idea. My question is, have you taken on, besides all this other stuff you've taken on, have you taken on trying to get other breweries to take on a lot of the same sustainable practices that you guys are doing?
Great question. To a certain extent, yes, but the challenge they have is timing. You got to get that grain out a day of. And so if they don't have a site to keep it on, they have to have a means to, whether it's via a trailer. So it's a real challenge because most breweries are building locked, they're landlocked, and they don't have that advantage that we've had. So, but I know in Chicago, there are initiatives for the breweries, for so many breweries in Chicago now. Farmers come up from Indiana and we'll take the grain. But again, it's all timing. If that grain sits for more than 24 hours in our building, our diners will know that it's there. So we need to get it out of the building. Yeah.
But are you trying to get them to move forward with some solar energy initiatives and other things you're doing, not just the compost?
Possibly. And then again, now with the what's happened here in the past couple of months is just so exciting. I'm still wrapping my brain around it, that you could actually afford to put a small solar array and without breaking the bank, and it would return some value to the property. And so, yeah, that's a great question, though.
Okay, and I'll have you repeat the question.
Yes.
So they can hear.
Okay.
We're doing Zoom.
Do you use permeable pavers in your parking lot?
We do not. It's a great question. We looked at that, and at the time we were putting a parking lot in, we decided to, in lieu of doing that, to opt with the islands that I mentioned. So we've got a lot of natural habitat within the middle of the parking lot. And at the time when we were building, the cost of doing that, and with the runoff and the civil engineering, and it was more it was more difficult to pull it off because the stormwater, when it rains hard, that water's got to go somewhere quickly because we've got a lot of cars, a lot of customers. So, but I would love to have done that if it were the right setting. It's a great question. Yeah.
Well, we'll give you a pass with everything.
Okay.
And who did your geothermal? That was the question on mine.
It was an engineer out of St. Louis. So I worked with a local contractor, and so Solarcrete, the building system I mentioned, the wall system, they turned me on to this engineering firm. But again, it was so new that everyone was just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. So when I look back 22 years ago now to the beginning of this engineering, I really wish I would have shopped out more engineers, only because this was a project that they weren't really familiar with commercial scale geothermal. Again, where you've got a lot of heat load that you need to get out into the lake and back in the wintertime. So I don't remember, beyond Solar Creek, the company, I don't remember the name of the engineer. Yeah. So
What year was that in?
this was, we broke ground in 02. So we were doing the plans drawing 01 and 02 and opened the doors to our restaurant in 03. So yeah. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to get a handle on exactly the layout. I'm embarrassed to say, we used to come to your place on a regular basis because our kids would play indoor soccer down the street from.
Yep.
And so it was at night after games, and we would come down there and get some meat. I had no idea that you had this whole quarry thing going on back there. It's behind the rest, because
Correct. Yeah.
you might go building and you had no clue there was anything behind there.
Yeah. It's a long, narrow site. So yeah, you wouldn't, and until you go through our banquet hall out on the patio, you'd never know it's there. But again, if you come on back and yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And in fact, there are people that don't even know that we have a brewery there. We've got a huge silo that sits there, 13,000 square feet of brewing space down in the basement, which as a side note, in part of the building, we built all of our brew space into the earth, kind of like the Germans did by necessity, because they had no refrigeration back then. So, so when you do come back, when you walk in, you're not going to see any tanks, but they're right below you. So, yeah, all right. Yeah.
I'm curious to know how many beers you can brew at one time, how many, how often, you change, you empty the grain, so to speak.
Right.
So how many times do you brew
Right.
a year, and then like how many brews total a year?
Okay, good question. We brew on average, I would say 3 days a week. We also package, so we can our beer. So, and we're a shorter, smaller crew now. COVID has had an impact on our industry that's we're still recovering from. So our sales went from here to there. But we're on average brewing 3 days a week. We have 2 size brew systems. One is a smaller system. It's basically a 17-barrel system. So we can brew half batches, 8 barrels, 16 kegs worth, about 240 gallons. So that's our R&D system. We love that because we can dabble. Like we just did a wet hopped IPA, which is we grow a little bit of hops in the back of the property. And when you harvest them, you brew the next day, you pick them, and it's a fantastically fun brew because you're dealing with the pure flower. Every other beer that we make, we're using pelletized, not processed, but they're dried hops, right? And they're processed that way. To brew the flower, it's like brewing with a fresh tea leaf or something. So that would be example of the small system that we brew. And then the bigger production brewery for our packaged beers is a bigger 50-barrel system. So yeah, about 3 days a week. And that fluctuates between summer into winter. We're coming into a real busy season now in this part of the country. Beer consumption from mid to late summer all the way through to Christmas is great. So the second half of the year is always better than the first half. For us, January, February, you hit the skids, but then St. Patty's Day comes around, and then the sun's higher in the sky, right? Yeah, and those of us in the north, it's time to drink more beers. So, but yeah, and then if you average 3 days a week, 50, so 150 to 180 beers a year. We've got about 16 on tap now at the pub. So we're about to tap a fresh cider that we did, hard cider, apples. And we just today packaged our Russian Imperial Stout that's aged for a year in bourbon barrels. So a lot of fun to taste that coming out of a year in a bourbon barrel. So if that's your thing, it's big and chewy and 12% alcohol. So it's delicious. Yeah. Thank you for the beer question. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna say, I'm just like, my brain's thinking. And especially my background is education, so I'm all about like this engaging the children and all of that is so great. So I'm gonna ask you a completely unrelated question, any of that. What is your favorite beer that you cannot brew?
Whoa, you're putting me on the spot. Wow. Okay, so the original Budvar, does anyone know? So Budweiser in America got its name from the Czech beer Budvar. And there was a lawsuit years ago, and Budvar, the original Budvar, won that lawsuit. So it was really great for the little guys like us to see Budweiser, walking away with his tail between his legs. So Budvar, which is a true Czech Pils, unbelievable. So I tend to, all the big beers I was talking about, but I go back to a well-made Pilsner. So yeah, that's a good question.
Then for the slow pour pills.
Slow pour. All right. I'll have to look for that. All right. Yeah, well, that's a great city for beer too, right? So, yeah.
Best for
All right. I'll remember that slow pour. Thanks for that. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you fish in your quarry?
You know what? Not enough. You know, it's funny because the quarry equals work. So it's all a wonderful labor of love. But if I go there, if I pull my fishing pole, she gave me a new pole 2 Father's Days ago that I've yet to use. So, but there are fish in it. And there's actually, legend has it, there's a very large flathead catfish that lives inside the fuselage of the plane. And I can say that because some of the divers that dove in it actually saw what was about a 4-foot long large animal fish living inside the plane. So Louis, we named him Louis years ago. So Louis there. So I should go fishing, but yeah, there's bass, a lot of panfish, crappie, bluegill, and so yeah, I need to go more. Thank you for the reminder. Yeah.
New source of revenue.
All right. Yeah. Right.
New source of revenue.
Well, and we've thought about that fish farm or raising fish. You know, I mean, walleye. Maybe it's deep enough. The old Friday fish fry. I don't know. So yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Raised bluegill because we don't get enough of those in restaurants.
You know, it's funny because there is a healthy blue population in the lake. Yeah, yeah. And I know bluegill cheeks. Don't people eat the
Walleye cheeks.
I
Yeah,
know,
oh,
but
that's okay,
I
yeah.
know that I grew up on a lake and I know I've always loved eating bluegill and crappie, and there's very few restaurants that ever serve it well.
Interesting. I'll have to remember that because I can't say I've really eaten bluegill,
Crappie.
or crappie. Yeah.
Oh,
Good flavor?
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
it is. Oh my God.
Nice.
Amazing.
All right. Yeah. And we get a little net towards the front there. All right. I got good ideas.
To me.
All right. You got it. All right. Yeah. You have to get in the water and help us harvest though, if you're okay with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question for you. How did your Peace Corps experience influence your business model?
Big time. So yeah, it did. And in many ways, I was young and impressionable, 21 years old. I was 2 weeks out of college and I signed up, not knowing where I was going to go, sent to Morocco originally on a reforestation program. And I get to Morocco and I find out the program never existed. It was my first education in bureaucracy. I literally, on a day off the plane, and my director says, you know what, this project doesn't exist, but I applied for volunteers, not knowing if I was going to get funding for it now. So I was really, really disappointed because reforestation in the third world is bigger now than it was back in 1987. So he goes to me, well, I've got another option. There's an orphanage with a garbage dump in the back. It was founded by French nuns in the 50s. And it's orphans from newborn to 3 years old. And he said, you can go down there as an ag volunteer and help try to build a small scale farm. And I definitely opted for that. I didn't go to the Peace Corps to teach English. That wasn't my thing. So I wanted the hands-on. I grew up with tomatoes in the backyard, but never any big time gardening. And when I get down there, and this is, southern Morocco in early September, it's 115 degrees, dust everywhere. And it literally is a garbage dump that the orphanage is using for the past, 30 plus years. And so the thing about the Peace Corps is they provide human resources, but no financial resources, which is great. So I had this concept, but no money. So I spent my first 2 months having to go out and raise enough money to buy, and this, you may laugh at this, shovels and a wheelbarrow, just so we could start. And the thing about a project of that scale, in 1 year and 2 years, you're not going to make big leeway and headway up. But I'm proud of the fact that we were able to clear the lot. We started raising rabbits because these little kids had very little protein in their diet. So we raised rabbits, koneh they're called in Arabic. And so and as a non-Muslim, I learned this too. I wasn't able to harvest the meat. So it has any animal has to be slaughtered by a Muslim. So we had a gentleman who worked in the orphanage as well. So he would slaughter the rabbits, and that little bit of rabbit meat would go into their little stew that they would get. And so it really was an eye-opening thing about sustainable gardening for me, because then we took the rabbit droppings, mixed it back in the soil, started a small-scale carrot plot. And so I guess now as an entrepreneur, I look back at that, and that level of kind of stick-to-itiveness and patience that it taught me translated very well on the business side. So thanks for that question, though. And this was, so in Morocco, any child born out of wedlock is considered hashuma, which means that the young woman, it's shameful. So there are many orphans that are just dropped off at this orphanage. And so these little kids, from newborns to 3, and, my little tiny bit of Arabic that I learned, but I'll never forget the one day when he was like the leader. He's 3 years old. And he was just this, tough little kid, and he wanted to see the rabbits. And he wanted to go see the rabbits. And I thought, we're making progress here. I understood what he said. And we went back there, and he wasn't afraid of the rabbits. And, to see that level of interaction with a little kid who's never known any type of interaction like that, he's, stuck in a little concrete orphanage for his whole life. So that it helped me a lot, not knowing at the time what it was going to give me in the future. So, but thanks for that question. Yeah.
Just a comment on Zoom. Someone said they've had a lot of great special occasions at your restaurant, banquet hall, wedding to 8th grade dinner, graduation dances, and they really love it living on Hoffman. Look forward to visiting soon.
Nice.
And she also said she grows hops at home and wants to know if you're interested.
Next year, absolutely. Next year, because the harvest comes early September. You get them off the vine, and we already brewed this batch, but she's welcome to bring her fresh hops. We had a friend do the same this year. We added it to our hops that we grew. So please, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yes, Kathy.
Can you talk a little bit about mindful waste and how much, oh gosh, you get on the spot.
Yeah.
Talked a little bit about it, but, oh, yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, basically it started in grad school when I was studying food waste, and it just kind of our goals of sustainability and composting came together. Really, I never knew that I would have a worm farm behind this pub, but getting into the curriculum at 220 was probably the best thing that happened, because now every 700 third graders learn about food waste and composting, and it's just been really rewarding. And we hope to bring all those kids behind our property, so we can reach more kids, and anyone really, whoever wants to learn about vermicomposting, come on by. And thanks, Cav, for the shout out. Yeah, and we do zero waste events too. So Citizens for Conservation, they're a big fundraiser Saturday. So the goal, we work with them to make sure that all their packaging is compostable, so we don't use any single-use plastics. And we did this 3 years ago with them. I think there was 300 to 400 people, and we ended up with only 7 pounds of garbage. So that was amazing. Yeah.
And at the school, do some of the like the food that they didn't eat, the apples or the oranges,
Yeah.
or whatever. You have refrigerators in the schools for that, and then that.
Yeah, so that was the beginning. When I did my waste audits, I realized there was collectively at the 12 schools, there was 200 pounds of perfectly good food going to waste every single day. And then I was like, I went to every principal. I'm like, okay, do you have kids? Would you let them throw away a banana or an apple? No. Okay, so we need to give them a choice. So yeah, I set up a food recovery program where all that food could be donated to local food pantries. So COVID kind of put a kibosh on that for a little bit, but I'm trying to get back there. So
Do you do work with 7 generations ahead?
yeah, so Gary has been, yes, wonderful mentor. And we've partnered with them, or we opened up another brewery or pub in Oak Park, but we since closed it, but we work together. It's a great organization as well. I was a Peace Corps volunteer as well. So we have a lot in common. We share that. I was in West Africa in a little tiny country called Benin. We just share, it's a passion. It's probably a sickness and a madness, because it's really challenging to run a business when the margins are so small, but yet, you're gonna spend the extra money on paper versus plastic, and because it's just what you have to do. And if we're gonna, sleep at night. So there's been challenges, but at the end of the day, we're pretty proud of what we've carved out there. So, yeah.
I'll add to this, that in this whole education component, that in 3rd grade, those little kids, fantastic, their brains are just coming alive. But if we can get into the high school level, I really believe that we're gonna tap, there's gonna be one kid that gets turned on that's gonna go and solve the carbon sequestration dilemma. And that's the real, that long term, that long game, that these young people, these brilliant, motivated young people, if they get that fire lit up within them and they have an experience and they take it to the next level, there's so many brilliant kids coming through at that high school level. So that's my personal hope, is that one of these kids in 20 years is gonna come up with the way that we can get that carbon back out of the atmosphere. So, yeah.
Jennifer, we're ready for you to come do a separate presentation.
There you go. Well, yes, thank you so much, everybody. It's been great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike and Jennifer, for that. That's a lot that you've been doing and just really impressive. So really appreciate all your work. And so next we have some announcements. If anybody